Hi, I'm iKia, and for today's video, I want to give an in-depth guide into wrong texts. We have already discussed this once before. This is going to be an updated version of a guide that already existed and actually, well, has been updated. So we're gonna do it all again once more from the top with more feeling. And yeah, I'm gonna do the entire thing, not just what we added, just to make this a complete guide basically for us to use. Including the older stuff, especially as well, discussing them in their new ways. And yeah, for that, we'll be using the guide as exists. It, of course, is in the guides folder. It is the last one in the list at 99.0, as I just want to keep it at the end of it, basically. We have updated it quite recently. We have added several items to this list. We're going to go through them one by one. Everything will be timestamped down below. So if you're interested in a certain thing, feel free to jump to that. Or for future reference, if you come back to it, you can always jump around like that. And we'll go item by item here and kind of explain what the wrong texts are, as we have several through the game with several things saying they are one thing when they are in fact another thing. How dare they? So yeah, let's go expose them all. But first off, let's actually explain what we are talking about when we are talking about wrong in-game texts. That's where those wrong texts are, of course. They have to be in the game. We're making this version 2. There's already, of course, a first version of this where we went through a shorter list, basically, because back then I hadn't added a bunch that we have added in now. And yeah, this has been updated pretty recently, and we're just turning it into a video now that that's the video you're watching now, which is going to be coming soon there. And let's just verbatim read what we're talking about here for the what wrong texts are and how we know. And that is that some of the descriptions in the game are wrong in their text, as some were changed to be different and others never had the correct text to describe them correctly. Many have been fixed through the ages, but some still remain. The ones below are still currently incorrect. And then, yeah, check time of last update to see if it's still up to date, and of time of recording and time of this guide. All of these are still incorrect in the game. And it's handy to know them, of course, that way. And the way we know these to be incorrect is by testing them in-game. For damage talents and such, if they state to be a certain stat pool, but if we calculate them like that and they don't match up to in-game, then we know they are incorrect. By further testing, we usually can figure out what they actually are. And that is core to this. At the end of the day, it doesn't even matter what some of the texts say, as we'll, for instance, go to the first one, for instance, here with Intimidate, and look at it's saying increases weapon damage. But then if we test it against in-game and actually calculate it as weapon damage and then check what the damage numbers in the game are, the game is, at the end of the day, the final arbiter in all of this. What it says goes. If and that includes as well if the devs say it in this text but have implemented it in a different way in actually the calculations. We need to know what those are. And to give for an example, or actually two here, as I've from a long time ago, as I was kind of the primary source for these after they kind of came out. This is timestamped. As we'll need to zoom out a little bit to show this one. This one is actually the time is, I always keep my spreadsheets from past and current testing and such, always with the time actually listed on them, or the date at least. So this is from 22/08/19, the 8th month, the 19th day of 2022, a little while ago, as we're already in 2025. Man, time goes fast. And this is testing for the exo gloves. These exo gloves, back then, of course, being the new exo gloves, but nowadays, yeah, you should actually add in that it's the bloody knuckles specifically. Also, from the icon, we can tell that. And the bloody knuckles, as we'll see in a little bit, they'll say that they are weapon damage. Here is just a calculation basically going through, and let's actually zoom into a little bit like this. Yeah. So we have a build, basically, we're hitting for a certain amount without the buff, with the buff. How much are we hitting for? And already we can already see that it can't really be weapon damage, for instance, in this case, as when we add in that damage, and this is on a build which has red cores to begin with, but already a weapon by itself would have basically weapon damage adding in, meaning that it should, if it was weapon damage, it's very unlikely for it to be at 20% output, which it is here. Because, for instance, if we actually calculate it as a weapon damage number, we see that the increase on that build would have been 1.1%. This 1.2, though, is also not a separate multiplier, because it is a 25% increase, as it states for itself, but we're getting 20% out of it. The build that we're testing it on is a glass and vigilance setup, so we have total weapon damage in there. And that already, this being 20% already tells me actually that it is total weapon damage, because if we were to have, for instance, the old obliterate at 25%, that would become 20%. And then we basically calculate it out in several ways. And nowadays, I basically, if the number doesn't match out, I'll usually just make a multi-calculator, the ones where I'm putting multiple in, and just put the stat into basically every category, and whatever matches in game is likely the one to be here as well. We see basically that if we calculate it as total weapon damage, then we do actually align with the game, and that is the way we test those. Same here as well from actually a day later, because that's when Sledge came in together with those Bloody Knuckles, apparently. I don't remember it actually, but yeah, apparently, likely it was because of the testing happening around the same time. And there as well, we see actually that already from the start, we can kind of guess that it's a separate multiplier, as this is done on a build with the damage to armor already on a build, but we're still getting 40% out of it, meaning that it's at the very least not just normal damage to armor. Now later on, of course, we would also discover that it also applies to armor plates, as we'll discuss about in a second. But generally, that's how we do it. We test what increases we get, and the game at the end of the day is basically always right. The actual game, not just the text that they put in there, but whatever the actual calculation ends up being, that will decide what we go with. And we'll start off here with the gear talents. And the way that we'll go through this, of course, is actually we'll have states where we'll discuss what it actually says it is, then what it actually is with all of these, and then kind of explain what it actually is, and then have a verdict on each. On this very first one with Intimidate, we already see that there are two, actually. This is one of the few that has two. I think actually the only one maybe that has two. And we'll discuss them both here. So starting off with states. States increases weapon damage. Now, this has basically two factors in it, which is that actually, first is saying weapon damage, which would be normally all weapon damage. But even if we were to see this as a separate multiplier, as several other places somewhat use similar wording, it would also be self-additive. So, for instance, in the same way that, for instance, Ranger is, if you have 2 times of it, basically, if you're at 2 times the range of it, you'll get 2 times the multiplier from it. So it's additive to itself before multiplying it against other things. And that would also be the case here. So, for instance, here we have, it would first, if it was weapon damage, it would be additive to that. All weapon damage, so it would be even reduced more, but even as a separate multiplier, if it was 9 stacks of 1.04 as we have it here, it would be a 1.36 as we're saying here for the normal version. But what it actually is separate stacks that are self-multiplicative. So each stack is a separate multiplier all onto itself, basically. It is the true multiplicative. This is the way that you should use the term. If you're just saying multiplicative, that is usually what that means. That means that it's multiplicative to itself, meaning that by extension, it's going to be multiplicative to everything else as well. So it is multiplicative to itself and multiplicative to its others. That's the only time that it's actually appropriate to use the term multiplicative, which, for instance, just to go on that tangent, DTOC isn't, because DTOC is additive to itself and then multiplicative to others. So DTOC isn't multiplicative. Just let's have that wrong text in here for, not in the game, but many people talking about the game. And yeah, what we see is actually then that this is, if you were to want to calculate it as its own separate talents, or just its own separate amp, basically, you could just, first of all, this would just be as many amps of this, of 1.4, here, 9 times of them. Here, though, it is basically to the power of. So it is 1.04 to the power of 9, which gets us actually a 42.33%. So it's basically 6% more, 6.33% more than even if the talent was as a separate multiplier but self-additive. But here it being self-multiplicative, it adds up really quickly. And even we see for the perfect version, it is this 48% versus this 40% that it would be. Then it also has a second part, which is wrong, and that is that since the changes to it, it used to be that, yeah, you did gain 1 stack each second. That used to be what it was for it, because you would gain 1 stack each second for 7 seconds. That was old version. The new version still says gain 1 stack each second up to a max of 9, but it's actually 3 stacks per second up to a max of 9. It caps out in 3 seconds. And yeah, that is what it actually is. Gain 3 stacks each second. And this is likely they forgot to change this after the rebalance of it. And the verdict on both of these is very much wrong text. These should be changed. Definitely, the 1 stack should just be changed to a 3. That also does not really require any translation, as it's just changing the numbers in all of the versions. The other one, what it should actually say likely is each stack amplifies weapon damage by. At least that would be closer to what it is. That still wouldn't give away that it is a self-multiplicative, but it would be closer to the reality of what they are. Going on to Hunter's Fury, which is the next one that kind of has a similar thing, and that is that in its especially its part where it is the stacking buff of it, it states and amplifies weapon damage by 5%, and here as well, amplifies weapon damage is actually not used per se correctly, because they should actually, we used that actually a second ago, but we should find a better way of saying this. Likely just saying amplifies damage would be a better way actually. And that is that in this case as well, it would imply basically that it is a 25% increase when you have these 5 stacks. There's 5 stacks stacking up to 5 times. In other places, like for instance, again, Ranger, and many other places, stacking buffs like this are worded like this, and they are just additive to themselves. This one isn't again as well. This one again is a true multiplicative, so this is 1.05 to the power of 5 in reality, and it's implying that it is a 5% amp, would be that 25% increase. What it actually is a 27.62% increase. And while this one is much smaller of a difference, just because we have 5 stacks of it, that's also the thing with self-multiplicatives. The reason you don't see them get used much outside of, well, a lot of games do use them actually, but generally what you don't get is to have a lot of stacks of them, because the more stacks of it that you have, the more it gets out of hand, because it is multiplying against itself as well. And that gets very big numbers very quickly, like we used to have with the Heartbreaker set, for instance. And yeah, the verdict on this one isn't per se wrong text, because yeah, as we kind of said, amplifies damage would be the right way, for instance, I would say, for describing both Hunter's Fury and Intimidate, but it is just ambiguous. And for instance, because Ranger has similar wording, but is still self-additive. And it would be nice if they, for instance, made a different wording for this by themselves, but likely they are not even aware of it. As we're kind of getting into the weeds of things. Another one that is commonly gotten wrong is Strikers. And what it, of course, states in its own text is that it increases total weapon damage by, as we see here, by 0.65, as without the backpack, of course. That's the increase that we get. But it states outright that it's total weapon damage. So it will be additive to other total weapon damage. It would apply to talents that are weapon damage related, like the Pestilence and such. Yeah, that it isn't. It outright isn't. The stacks are self-additive, separate multiplier. So it's adding to itself and then multiplying against everything else. And in this case as well, we've checked it against basically any other stat that exists in the game, and it is separate to all of them. It's not going to any other pool, because yeah, we would get diminishing returns that way. So it isn't total weapon damage. This is just fully, as our verdict is, wrong text. This should be weapon hits increase damage by this amount. And yeah, weapon damage would be maybe the right word, or amplifies. It depends, kind of, you have to kind of make all of these kind of align, but this then is not a self-multiplicative per stack. So this would need different wording than the rest. And I'll leave it up to them to kind of figure out where they want to go with that. And continuing on with Over the Top, which is the Bloody Knuckles talent. I wouldn't know that off the top of my head either. Don't worry about it. And yeah, what it states outright is that it grants plus 25% weapon damage. Meaning overall that this would be an added to the pool of all weapon damage plus specific weapon damage. Yeah, this would be additive, so we would get diminishing returns to it. We do get some form of diminishing returns to it if we're using a different talent with total weapon damage. And that's also our giveaway here, as we kind of talked about as one of the ones, as one of the specific examples on how we know what pools they are. Because yeah, the damage increase is actually total weapon damage. And that we know because it is additive to other total weapon damage if we have it on the build. And this outright is just wrong test. This should say increases or grants plus 25%, which also is a weird way of saying it because everywhere else they use increases, but here grants. It is plus 25% total weapon damage. And yeah, outright a wrong text as the verdict. Going on to Heatstroke. Heatstroke is the backpack talent here for the Ortiz Exuro gear set. This one as well goes into it with plus 25% weapon damage to enemies set on fire by the Ortiz turret, basically. But it isn't 25% weapon damage, as again, this would be, it would be additive to our all weapon damage pool, and we would see the returns in that way, and together with that, it would also only apply to the weapon. What it actually is a separate multiplier. So this is increasing our weapon damage by this full 25%, being a full separate new multiplier. And it isn't additive to any of the other pools that we have available. And also, oddly as well, it's not only affecting our weapon, it is also affecting ballistic skills. Now, for this to be triggered, we need, of course, the special flame turret, or the flame turret equipped, which becomes special with the Exuro set. So we can't have a different turret, which would be the other ballistic skill, because it would, the three ballistic skills are the turret, or the assault turret, the striker drone, and the sniper turret, to be exact. The two turrets are, of course, kind of out of the picture because we can't have that and the turret and the flame turret together. But what we can have is the drone. The striker drone actually gets a buff from this as well. And this is actually an oddity that also used to exist with ongoing directive before, and still exists for Exuro now, as sometimes some things that do affect weapon damage also affect some of the ballistic skills. And outright, this is a wrong text. This should, at the very least, well, if they fix it applying to the striker turret, which not a big issue in this case. Neither was it in the ongoing, although they did fix that one. But yeah, this should be basically amplifies weapon damage by 25% instead of this plus 25 weapon damage. Going on to another backpack that has similar issues, Signature Moves, the Tip of the Spear backpack talent. This one, again, also starts with plus 50% weapon damage for, and then, yeah, 15 seconds after fully depleting the signature weapon of ammo. But it's especially this 50% weapon damage, again, implying that it's all weapon damage. It would have to be then additive to red cores and specific weapon damage and such. It isn't. It is a separate multiplier. It isn't additive to anything else. It is 50% right off the top. This one, though, only applying to weapons in this case, and not as well to other things. Yeah, it is because of that outright a wrong text. It is. This should also again say amplifies weapon damage by 50%. Going on to the next one, which is our full flag, which is actually the True Patriot 4-piece talent. It isn't the full thing, but actually just one part of it, as it outright states dealing damage equal to their total health and armor, which is, reading it out full, is enemies that die while under the effect of all three debuffs create a 5-meter explosion, dealing damage equal to their total health and armor, to their total health and armor. What this actually is damage deals damage based on the player's health and armor, not the enemies. This is an odd bug. I'm not actually sure if this crept in at some point or this was always this way. We haven't cared much about True Patriot for forever, basically ever since the last time we really cared was when it was some form of meta, especially with Pestilence in the DZ. That's a long time ago. But this, yeah, the explosion isn't based actually on the enemy's health and armor, which would actually likely very much increase the amounts that the explosion could do. But it's based on ours, meaning though that, yeah, if you're mostly blue core and such, you do get a little bit more damage out of that explosion, but that explosion as well is basically tertiary to first doing the group buffs and then maybe doing your own damage, and then explosions maybe a little bit as a on top. And we can test this as well very easily by shooting different enemies. For instance, purples and elites should have different explosion amounts. They don't. And when we change our armor values by adding or removing a blue core, it does change. So yeah, this one is, the verdict is a wrong text. Although this one, I don't think they need to change the text. I feel they need to change the talent. And this might be also a small way to, with other increases, to maybe help buff True Patriot to be a little bit more true to the Patriots and not a false Patriot as it kind of is at the moment. And the next one is Galvanize and Perfect Galvanize. And this is more of a discrepancy between the two. So we have the normal version, we have the perfect version here side by side. The normal version says here 40% of your armor as bonus armor to allies. And it's especially that to allies that is at somewhat fault here. Or maybe this one I would say actually is maybe the right way to say it. Because the perfect version says as bonus armor to you and all allies. And what this actually is implying, of course, is that this perfect version is applying to you and all allies, which normally actually in this game, allies does mean other people than you, the way that, for instance, Firewall uses it. Although it gets used inconsistently, of course, because this other allies on the normal Galvanize version, Galvanize always applies to you as well. For the normal version, for the perfect version, this isn't also something that is like raid rules, the way that Vanguard is. For instance, Vanguard does not apply to you outside of Countdown and raids. It does apply to you when you are in Countdown or in raids, basically in 8-man settings. This one, though, isn't that. This one is just always applies to you and always applies to all allies alongside of you. So likely, actually, the wording should be you and all allies, as your allies does get used in some other context to mean people other than you. For instance, yeah, with the with the firewall buff, where it doesn't apply to you, it does apply to allies. Are you your own ally? I mean, some people hate themselves, so you know that's maybe why. And yeah, they both work the same way, and they are worded differently for a normal and a perfect version. The perfect version, of course, came in much later. And yeah, this implying, I've seen several people kind of get caught up on this and thinking that because it says it this way, that the perfect version does apply to you as well. Whereas actually the normal version that doesn't say it also applies to you. So this one isn't per se fully wrong text, but it is inconsistent. That's our verdict here, and it leads to confusion. And you should avoid that. Just have basically the normal and the perfect versions have the same wording, because there's no reason, for instance, here for it to not be to you and allies with the normal version as well, and just change the values. Going on to break, oh no, actually not breaking point. I saw the B and I assumed that, but yeah, it's actually Virtuoso, the new gear set that came in with this season. And what it says along the way here is that at 4 stacks, well, intimidating killing enemies from both ranges will build up stacks. At 4 stacks, all bonuses are multiplied by 2. And yeah, that is the part that we're kind of concerning ourselves with. This bonuses are multiplied by 2 and triggered at the same time for 15 seconds. This 2 is not a 2. This 2 is a 1.5. And the patch notes and actually the release of the season, when they had basically that page that had the what is new basically coming into the game, patch note wise kind of, that also had it at 1.5. And that's actually what it is. And if we calculate it with 2, we land on the wrong numbers. If we calculate by 1.5, we get the right numbers. This is actually, of course, just, yeah, it is the 1.5 already seems a well enough number for this, although actually it could use a buff to do, although it might be actually a little bit too strong with 2, I would say maybe as well for certain scenarios, because Virtuoso by itself, just to go off on that tangent, is one of the few gear sets where we can get weapon damage straight out of it, where most of the other gear sets and such are either specifically a separate multiplier not applying into the weapon damage pool, or they are, for instance, with Breaking Point, it is weapon damage, but it's only for rifles, and Pestilence and other things, of course, for instance, Headhunters and such, can, of course, benefit from extra weapon damage, and Regulus as well. So this one is outright a wrong text. This too should be a 1.5, just to match reality and make things a lot easier for those coming into the game. And we'll start our weapon talents as we go into them with a perfect Sledgehammer and also normal Sledgehammer, actually. Both of them have this wording. And we'll start here with that it states more damage to armor. And yeah, it says it in here. Targets with mark will take 20% more damage to armor. Now, damage to armor would lead us to believe that it is in the damage to armor pool, basically. It is additive to things like contractors, two-piece Walker Harris, third stats on weapons, if you have damage to armor there. It isn't. It is a completely separate multiplier. And we can know that just by testing it out and seeing that it isn't additive to those, because we would have diminishing returns in them. Seeing that it is also a separate multiplier, there's actually more than that, because damage to armor would only really apply to armor. And armor, generally, when the game talks about armor, it is the white bars on the health bars above the health of an enemy, so the armor bars on top. Whenever they have that, they have armor, basically. Then we have a different thing, which is armor plates. And armor plates, generally on heavies, on warhounds and such, is the plates that you break off so you can deal damage to the health underneath. And in most cases, almost all cases, there's just a few exceptions, hitting armor plates is basically health. It is for heavies, it is for warhounds. Technically, it is whatever's, if they have armor or health underneath it, technically. But yeah, all of those, the ones we deal the most with, like heavies, they have health underneath it, so their armor plates take health damage. There's also the exception, the raid heavies, the Iron Horse, Morozova fight heavies, they take damage to armor, they have armor bars. But they're special in that way. But yeah, this damage to armor, normally a damage to armor would not affect things like armor plates that are above health, but what it actually is that it is also applying to all armor plates at all times, basically. So what this wording-wise should be, because that's our verdict as well to start with, is it is a wrong text, but what it should be is actually take 20% more damage to armor and armor plates, or amplifies that damage to armor and armor plates to be kind of fully there, because otherwise, yeah, it kind of makes it sound like it is just damage to armor additive to that, and also that doesn't apply to armor plates, and it's quite handy to know that it does. The second one crept in this season as, yeah, in PDS1, they were planning to actually make it work this way, and that is that from the agent that applied the mark, so yeah, that is here in that 20% more damage to armor from the agent that applied the mark, meaning that it is, in this case, it is implying at the very least strongly that it is personal. That is only the player that applied it, they will only benefit from it. So not group members, because yeah, Sledge was group-wide, is group-wide, and that's also the thing here. So what it is actually is still group-wide. In PDS2, what they did was, instead of keeping it at 40% and making it personal, they went with making it 20%, a lot lower, of course, well, half. Both for 20% for perfect, 15% for the normal variant, reducing it by half, but then they kept the group buff component still to it, which to me, it was also the right way to go. It's still kind of nice to have, but isn't as overpowered as it used to be, and as needed as it used to be. And yeah, that was the big change. Or well, there was no big change basically. The reduction amount was, but it is still a group of, and this text here is basically just a wrong text, likely a leftover from PTS1 going into PTS2. They just forgot to change this, and that text should not be there. It is basically 20% more or 20% amplified damage to armor and armor plates to the enemy with the mark, basically. It isn't personal, and it isn't damage to armor. So that is one of the rare doubles. We'll go on to Mosquito. Mosquito song, which is of the Mosquito. And on the Mosquito song, it says as well, and take 25% more damage to armor. And as we kind of discussed upstairs here, this is going to have the same issue as we'll kind of have. This damage to armor that it states here is not damage to armor. It is amplified damage to armor and armor plates. But there's another caveat, because yeah, this would be indeed it isn't additive to DTA and such. We know that from testing. The damage increase is a separate multiplier. Now, this multiplier would seem to be in the same pool as Sledge, but they're not. They're separate multipliers. It's double separate. And that is because yeah, they are multiplicative to each other. They multiply each other as well. If they went into the same pool, even though they seem to be of the same ilk, they're not going actually into the same pool, adding together, they're multiplying against each other. And yeah, this is not additive to DTA, but then as well, it is important to kind of know that even though they should kind of have the same wording as Sledge, it should be somewhat different because it is actually a different pool. It isn't going into the same pool. And that makes it extra odd because, yeah, now they've basically reused that effect. They've created a similar pool, but now they need basically two naming conventions between them. Or just, yeah, if they went with amplifies, that could solve it for between Perfect Sledge and a Mosquito. And these two are actually separate multipliers, and adding them together gets us a pretty big bonus, much bigger than just the 45% that it would be if it was additive. Going on to Perfect Optimist, one that we actually missed the last time, or well, normal Optimist as well, but Perfect by extension. It isn't just in the Perfect one, and that is that it states for every 10% ammo missing. This always makes it imply, and kind of a lot of people believe it works this way and are surprised when it isn't, when they do any actual testing on it. It doesn't go in chunks of 10%. What happens is that if you actually test it and actually have it on a build where you don't have any other stacking buffs or such, and it should be a flat number, it doesn't go 10 rounds and now it goes into a new threshold and then kind of goes like that, which also the side of the weapon kind of implies the marker for it. What it actually is that every shot does more damage than the previous shot. And that is the issue here, because what it actually is, every shot does more damage than the last. It is not in segments. It is 35% or 45% for the Perfect overall, basically divided by the max size. So on our AR, this would be actually 51 because the tactical reload does get counted in it if a weapon has the option to have the tactical reload. So it is basically that 45%. It is divided by 51 for a 50 round mag, or a weapon with a 50 with a plus 20 round mag, a 30 base plus 20, just to clarify, because we have other weapons like the AUG being 42, and then the plus, and then one more for the tactical reload. It is basically that 45% is getting divided by 51, and every chunk is getting that amount of weapon damage increase. So every shot is going up by that amount versus the last, instead of going in what it is implying. This is still, I'm still going to consider this a wrong text. It should be worded differently. It still technically applies, because every 10% that you empty the max, you'll get 4.5% over that. But it should say it per shot. That is it. This is basically not the right way to kind of explain it, because a lot of people don't understand how that works and get it in their head that, oh, you only get this number on the very last shot, which you do, but then the shot before that doesn't mean that it is in the previous chunk. No, it is just a tiny bit less than that. meaning that a lot of people underestimate how powerful Optimist can be, even though nowadays, of course, it's kind of outclassed by Killer and other things. Going on to Perfect Precision Strike, but by extension as well, the normal version. And that is where it says here, hitting an enemy within 20 meters will use all stacks to provide plus 35% amplified damage to enemies within 20 meters for 5 seconds. And the part we have kind of umbrage with is that this is will use all stacks and then to provide its damage bonus. Will use all stacks. You can stack up to 2 stacks. Each kill outside of 20 meters gets you 1 stack. The description is kind of just vague because it is actually each stack separately gives one of the, well, in this perfect case, gives each stack is 35%. So you can get a total, if you have 2 kills outside of the range, when you trigger it within range, you don't get 35%, which basically from reading this is what I took away from it, and many with me, I feel. It isn't. You activate both stacks and you get 35%. So what they should say here, will use each stack, and each stack provides 35% amplified damage. Because saying it as the way that they're doing makes it sound as if you need both of these stacks, which you also don't. Even on 1 stack, you can trigger it and you get 35% for 5 seconds. Making it, yeah, a lot more of a powerful stack, especially with these 2 stacks with 7% amp. That's actually pretty strong. Of course, that still doesn't take away the major issue for Precision Strike, which is that it is just for 5 seconds. And that is the big issue with it. And that's why we go with other talents. Consistency kind of matters. And this one is very inconsistent because of that 5 seconds. But yeah, their wording is basically implying different things than actual outcome is. And it's kind of just bad wording with some of the newer talents, as yeah, it should basically read, will use each stack to provide that amount, basically. And then also up to 70%, so that you just understand that this is for a stack, basically. And yeah, the verdict is misleading. Text should be reworked to say, will use all stacks, each stacks provides. Talking about there. Going on to Brazen, and this one, though, we don't have the perfect between brackets because it's only on perfect Brazen for this one. And that is that in here, it has an end text, basically, where after we have the same text, but with just for 4 stack at 4 pellets, basically, getting 4 stacks for the perfect version. It also goes on to say that a thing that the normal version doesn't have, killing an enemy will provide plus 8% amplified damage on the next shot. This implies, of course, like if we just outright read this, if we get a kill with the perfect version, we get an extra 8% amp on top. This is likely just a leftover from when this actually was 1% per stack and the total would be 8%. Because, yeah, what it actually is, there is no bonus for a kill shot. There is no extra bonus that you get from killing an enemy and then going on to another. This 8% is, as it is kind of talked about here, does not exist. But what it actually is, a kill shot will trigger a full stack on Brazen. So whenever you actually get a kill, even if you hit with just 1 pellet, which would normally not trigger Brazen, you still get the full 8 stack Brazen, basically. So as long as you make the full kill, you get a full stack, basically, all 8 stacks. And this is, though, as well, not unique to the perfect version, so it still wouldn't need this extra text if it was for the perfect version. But yeah, what it is likely left over from when Brazen was 8%. So back in the day, or well, at its initial conception, it was 8% for each stack, basically being 8% on total. And likely the perfect version was meant to only have that mechanic of when you get a kill shot, you get a full stack. The normal version has it as well, so this extra text just doesn't make sense here anyway, even if that was the case, unless they meant it this way and they need to fix it that way. They need to actually change the mechanic, not the text. But yeah, the implication here just doesn't exist, the full implication, and this is just a full wrong text. Honestly, you could just drop this last part here and just make the normal and the perfect sound the same, and the big difference between them is actually just that pellet. How many pellets are required to hit to trigger it? Yeah, let's move on to our next section. Then we have a few miscellaneous ones just to discuss here as well. We'll start here with a tooltip or a loading tip as we have it here. And this is one that often gets brought up when discussion about loot in Countdown happens, and that is that Countdown loot loading screen tip, and yeah, what it states is all the items found in Countdown have heroic quality. And this gets used quite often for people going like, oh no, challenging and heroic have the same loot, which they don't actually. We'll discuss that in a second. But yeah, what it actually is, each Countdown difficulty tier has corresponding quality of loot. For instance, consider normal and hard difficulty Countdown droppings purple. And this should be the real litmus test for this. This just doesn't hold up just by the virtue that normal and hard Countdown exists where we can get purples, where the loot drops are much worse. So at the very least, not all the items, because yeah, normal and hard also exist, even though we never use them really, right? But they do exist, and they do matter for this. And yeah, what this actually is, this is wrong text now. This wasn't wrong text when it was implemented, because this is outdated due to the addition of difficulty selection to Countdown. Countdown, when it came in, it only had one difficulty, a singular one, which was challenging. Challenging has around the same amount, the same numbers basically for drops as heroic, open world, heroic missions, and such as heroic. Countdown itself has a little bit better drops. Overall, how they make the drops work with higher difficulties and such is that the minimum roll, so the smallest the bar can be basically, is set per difficulty level. And legendary, for instance, over heroic in the normal world, heroic has a set amount. Let's say if that is like 7 as a minimum roll for a stat, we won't say one specifically because I don't have specific numbers. I am considering at some point actually doing deep testing and getting some of these numbers maybe. But what we get then is that on legendary, for instance, then it'll be 8. The difference between challenging and heroic Countdown is much smaller than, for instance, a jump from heroic to legendary or any of the normal jumps from challenging to heroic or such from the open world. It is a very small difference, but there is a difference, and that yeah, this getting repeated all over again. This was actually one of the impetuses for for this guide, and yeah, the verdict is definitely this text kind of is wrong at this point. It wasn't when it was implemented. And yeah, this we have another one as well for from Countdown. Although this one as we'll end up seeing is not actually fully a wrong text. It's just misleading. But yeah, what it says is completing the third encounter results in extra rewards. So the third encounter would be the third activity. So we can of course do 2 activities and then unlock the main, which is usually what most people do, and then we go do the main. You could do that third activity. What you would get is, on any difficulty, 1 Countdown requisition. Because yeah, that's what it actually is, well, there are extra rewards. And there are, this doesn't actually just say how much though. And that is that it will be 1 extra Countdown requisition that will go doubled to 2 when you extract, because it gets doubled, of course. If you do a successful extraction, that's actually a doubled amount of what you would get originally. So yeah, you get 2. 2 requisition on a run that, yeah, on challenging, if you get all the hunters, is 158 or 140. If you miss one of the hunters, it's 208 on heroic, which, yeah, the 158 on challenging would be a 160. 208 would become a 210, 2 more. For running to that extra objective and then doing it. Never really worth it. And yeah, it's kind of, yeah, it's just very much the verdict. Misleading. There are rewards, but not of commensurate value at all. There is no worth in doing them. Let's move on to one thing we'll see with side missions. Most people will not see these anymore unless you have a character set up for bounty cheesing, or you're doing the game again and just going through the main campaign and such. Because yeah, we have 2 side missions here, and both of them state at the end of it here that increases damage to elites. So yeah, well, this blueprint unlocks a muzzle that increases damage to elites. Players that have been around for a while will remember damage to elites. Year 1 had this. It got removed with Woni and Gear 2.0. The stat no longer exists. Actually, the stat got reused either for DTH or for DTOC. I don't actually remember what it got turned into, but yeah, basically they reconstituted the whole stat pool for something else. So it doesn't even just not exist anymore. It just completely got reworked into something else, and this stat could never really exist. And this is, of course, what they are, because what it actually is a crit chance mod nowadays and a headshot mod. And this is just outdated. This used to be true in year 1. This is for side missions that you only really see on when going through the game again. And honestly, if you don't pay too much attention, you would miss this completely. And you would get the blueprint and not, for instance, if you're actually new, not check what you actually get from that stat. So yeah, it's easy to miss, easy to forget, and it's very much outdated and was never updated after Gear 2.0 because they should have been and showed the new stats. But a very minor one, just more as a piece of trivia. This next one, though, less so. This is where the new edition starts here. And one thing we forgot about to add in here, and this one is very simple. The third stat, damage to health on LMGs, or which we can put on LMGs, but we can put on any weapons. But sometimes we do use it on LMGs, especially, where it can be sometimes a decent choice. It states, here taken from the library, max 9.5%. And if you put it on a weapon, you see there stated 9.5%. If you actually go to your stat sheet afterwards, where DTH does get shown, damage to targets out of cover doesn't, but DTA and DTH do get shown on your stat screen there, you will notice that it's 10 DTH. And when we also calculate, and that's not just a fluke of the stat screen, if we actually try to get matching numbers with in-game, it is 10% DTH. This 9.5% is just plain wrong for some weird reason, and the actual increase is 10% over that bar. And yeah, this is just testable, and we can show that it's 10%. And this one then is just outright a wrong text. That 9.5 should not be there. This should be a full 10, and this has been there forever. And one that I definitely forgot. And right after we made the previous version, kind of went like, oh! Another one, this one though, as we'll kind of see at the end, isn't per se a wrong text. It's inconsistent. And that is that we have a stat called repair skill. And we get that on mods, we get that on gear, a lot of talents. We'll talk about repair skill. That is supposed to be actually what that stat is. Repair skill is, or well, repair skills actually, is the amount plus 20% to your repair skills. That's how that is likely meant to be worded. I can't, of course, speak for the devs, but then we have things like Safeguard and Reformation, which always had this already. They say it the other way around. They say, while at full armor increases total skill repair. They swapped the wording around. And as well here, skill repair. Now, originally with the game, we had talents like this and such, but most of it was repair skills. The only place that actually should be skill repair, so that is the amount that you repair a skill by, that's on the Artificer. And the Artificer, honestly, in my opinion, what it should be is that this is just inconsistent, and it's leading to confusion, as so many people quite often ask, what's the difference between this one and this one? And that is that, yeah, all of them should be repair skills, and also including Descent, as we'll come to in a second, because yeah, skill repair should only be used for Artificer Hive. So the Artificer Hive has a stat where it repairs skills, so skill repair, percentage. There it should be that. Everywhere else, it should be repair skills, including some of these talents, which lead into this pool, because if this is the stat, like the on gear, this is the stat. So on talents, it should also be that amount, because this isn't, for instance, a different thing, or this doesn't actually go into, for instance, while repair skill does increase your skill repair on the Artificer, it isn't just onto that stat. It is, of course, going into repair skills. But then when Descent came out, and that is the egregious one, the entirety of Descent uses skill repair. everything. So the skill repair that you get from your permanent upgrade or repair skills, which is the stat that you actually get, all of the ones you get from the permanent upgrades, from all of the talents, everything in the set is skill repair, which kind of sucks. So they themselves kind of lost track on how this is supposed to be. And yeah, this is just super inconsistent. All of everything except for the artificer should be repair skills. The only one that should be skill repair should be the artificer. And then, you know, we can have peace and prosperity in our times. But yeah, of course, this is just a minor thing. But it is very confusing for newer players. And the more we can get those away, the better. And yeah, thus we have reached the end of this guide as we link back to other things. And actually, for a game as old as Division, as we'll go into our conclusion here, this isn't too bad of a list. Because honestly, there are games that have much worse than this, especially through rebalancing and such, as we kind of had with, for instance, Strikers here. Strikers at some point was, I believe, total weapon damage. It no longer is anymore, so they should have rewarded it when it changed it. Things like Sledge, of course, that recently got changed, but then didn't. But then the text made it in. The change didn't make it in, but the text made it in. Those kind of things happen. As well, to kind of give speculation as to why some of these things don't get quickly fixed as much as we would want to, is that this text, of course, we go like, okay, they just, you know, you just go in here, whenever this is filled in the game files, you just alter it, right, from this to whatever else it needs to be. The thing is then that in actuality, the actually is, is that then needs to be translated likely into dozens of languages. I don't know actually how many languages Division 2 is available in, but yeah, they would need to translate that. That is usually the bottleneck there. Everything that goes into the game needs to be translated and checked upon through all of the languages. And yeah, those kind of things can take a while, and that's also likely why they don't invest too much resources into doing such things. So will likely this wrong guides will stay up to date for at least a little bit. Likely more so things getting added to it than things getting fixed off of it, which is kind of annoying, of course. But also, honestly, in the grand scheme of things, what do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 talents, weapons, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 gear talents, and a few miscellaneous things. Honestly, that's not too bad of a track record. It is just, though, that you do need to know these things, and that's why this guide exists, and feel free to as well, yeah, and just whenever somebody accidentally says the wrong things or such. For instance, quite often people think that Pestilence will benefit from Strikers because it does say total weapon damage here, but it isn't. Feel free to, yeah, link them to this guy. And yeah, so we reached the end of this video. If you did enjoy this video, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below. It does help out. So I'll do that little bit of shilling here. And yeah, for future videos, we're going to go into that Umbra build showcase. And also, of course, we're going to have several other rambling talks coming on up. And the skill guide will also likely come out in following this one up in the future, shortly, actually. So yeah, I hope you join me for those. But for now, as always, have a good night.